So here's the deal. The media group that distributes the Untamed, or Modao Zushi, is one of the most litigious, ever. So, to avoid all of that, I will be presenting this analysis in, honestly, slideshow form. There will be some video clips here and there, but most scenes from the show I will talk about will be in picture form. And with any luck, I can finally defeat my arch nemesis. Fair use. The Untamed is a 2019 Chinese drama based off of the Zhanjia novel Grandmaster of Demonic Cultivation by Mo Zhang and is one of the 3 adaptations of the book aside from the animated series and mobile game. This is the story of how Wei Wuxian became the Yiling Patriarch, an infamous necromancer who died shamed and exiled from the cultivation world. 16 years later, he finds himself resurrected and reunited with his closest friend and lover, Long Wanji. Together, they discover the conspiracy against him that led to his death and avenge an old friend in the process. If you watched my previous video, and good on you if you did, you already know the drill. I take a handful of episodes from each story arc, summarize them, and then analyze them to the tune of a different literary theme or trope. Today, we are focusing on world building, specifically world building through characters. World building is extremely important for any fantasy drama, and while I wouldn't exactly put this up there with high fantasy like Double World or Lord of the Rings, Zhanjia is still a subset of fantasy, and anyone who says otherwise is incorrect. You might find yourself asking, the LAN lecture only takes place in one place. How does this apply to world building? Well, let's start with some basics. The West doesn't really have an equivalent of the Zhanjia genre. Besides, let's be honest here, European fantasy is getting kinda overrated these days, no matter how good it is, and we have Game of Thrones to thank for that, I think. The Zhanjia genre has 4 absolutes: China, magic, cultivators, and fighting. Everything else is mostly fair game. One of the reasons we don't see a lot of fantasy work on television is money. TV production and adaptation is really difficult, despite what a lot of critical channels seem to think. It also takes time, which, as in all things, is a very precious commodity, and CGI takes a lot of time. That's why it's worth noting that any strange gaffes in the special effects should be taken with a grain of salt. I would rather have a show with a quality story than quality dragons, if you know what I'm saying. Okay, I'm done throwing shades at Game of Thrones, but what I'm trying to say is that production is always limited in one way or another. So making a world even slightly different from our own is actually very hard. I mean, I'm no time traveler, but I don't remember ancient China having flying swords. One of the greatest mistakes in world building is thinking that your world is only defined by its structure rather than its people. For instance, if someone regularly flouts tradition and no one reacts, then what's the point of the tradition even being there? Imagine if Wei Wuxian became the Yiling Patriarch and everyone was like, yeah, okay, sure. This is what leads to those massive lore dumps that everyone hates. You can make all the rules you want, but if you don't enforce them, then they don't matter. This is one of the many reasons I hate narration. You can tell me all you want about the world, but if I don't see it applied, then I don't care. What the LAN lecture arc does is give you an idea of what each sect is like without ever going there, with the exception of one, but it sets up some nice subverted expectations and a badass character entrance later on, but let me not get too ahead of myself here. The summary won't be as succinct in the previous video, this one's going to be slightly experimental. And as always, spoiler warning for everything in the show. Once again, I am Dr. Canon, and I will be your surgeon for today. In the previous episode, after being resurrected and sussed out by a series of coincidences, infamous demonic cultivator Wei Wuxian passes out after being beaten by his former adopted brother, Jiang Cheng. He dreams of his life 16 years ago, where Jiang Cheng still thinks of him as a brother, and Zhang Yanli, his older sister, is still alive. We see them in Kai Town, where Jiang Cheng is nagging Wei Wuxian to act right, while he promptly ignores everything his brother says. Episode 3 opens up with the Jiang sect finding out that the last inn in town is out of rooms. Not because the town is particularly busy, but because a member of the Jin sect bought out the entire inn for an exorbitant fee, so he and his 12-person entourage can stay without being bothered. Brief aside, working in the hotel business myself, I've actually known famous people to do this, including a person, I won't say who, but let's just say they were a famous comedian, reserving an entire top floor of a Regency hotel during the busiest holiday for the year, not just for their entourage, but for their families too. This is when we meet Lo Qingyang, or Mian Mian, which is short for Queen of My Heart, honestly. She is part of Zhen Jishuan's entourage and his closest confidant. This is fated meeting number 1. Wei Wuxian is not about to let his sister with a weak constitution sleep in the cold, so he tries to flirt his way into getting at least the 3 of them a room. He gives her the equivalent of a pickup line, and Mian Mian is a good sport, so it works. Until it doesn't. However, on their way out, they run into the rest of the Jin sect, led by Jin Jishuan, whose hobbies include being rich, loving his sword, and tea sniffing. This is not a fated meeting because they already know each other. In fact, he's been betrothed to Zhang Yanli since childhood. Even though they keep making meaningful eye contact, Jin Jishuan has no problem kicking her out of the inn along with her brothers. This man is the reason Wei Wuxian cannot tolerate elitist bullshit. The Jiang clan is made up of free spirits, and people often speak to each other like equals as seen in the previous episode. The Jin sect won't even allow the possibility of being surrounded by common people. Wei Wuxian straight up describes them as puritanical, but considering that he's decked out in gold and can hardly sit anywhere without a cushion, that's clearly not true, and everyone knows it. Hurt and embarrassed, Zhang Yanli forgets to double-check her bag and leaves the lecture invitations at the inn, causing them to lose even more face once they arrive at the cloud recesses, where the guard refuses to let them in. Regardless of the fact that the Jiang sect has probably let several generations of cultivators attend these lectures. This is where they meet Long Wanji, and despite his slow-motion walk, theme song, and aloof looks, this is not the inciting incident, though Jang Chung has no problem stage whispering about him. A lot of Chinese shows are dubbed, so you're gonna get a lot of stage whispering. So just assume that anytime someone whispers, that unless they say they've been heard, that they're out of earshot. One of their sect members is apparently dead, so Lan Wangji is not about to flout the rules and let them in without their invitations, especially after Wei Wuxian loses his temper and gets hit with that infamous silence spell from the previous episode. Never one to apologize verbally, Wei Wuxian goes back to get their invitations while his brother and sister wait outside. Zhang Yanli can barely glance in Zhang Cheng's direction when Wei Wuxian isn't around. It actually doesn't take Wei Wuxian that long to come back with the invitations, and some Emperor Smile liquor, which is totally not a metaphor, but we'll cover that in another episode. He discovers that Long Wanji isn't a total asshole, and actually let in his sect without the invitation. But he's not about to be left outside, so without a guard, he just straight up breaks the ward on the gate and waltzes right in. He ends up having to climb a wall in the cloud recesses and meets Long Wanji a second time. And he's not happy about that. In fact, unhappy seems to be his default state. You see, liquor is forbidden in cloud recesses, with just about everything else, including breaking wards and being out past curfew. Everything Wei Wuxian is doing right now. For what's probably the first time, Wei Wuxian can't talk himself out of trouble. And Long Wanji meets someone who doesn't treat him like a ticking time bomb. Unstoppable Force meets Immovable Object, and we have fated meeting number 2, which is the inciting incident for this whole damn story. Pause. I need to talk about this. I need to talk about this whole scene and why it's so bloody important. Without this sword fight right here, these men would not have acknowledged each other's skill in battle. One important thing to know about these men is, yeah, they're attracted to each other physically, but they respect strength of character and skill. And both men, despite their faults, have this in spades. If they never acknowledged each other's skill, they would have never become soulmates. If this meeting never happened, there's a possibility that Wei Wuxian would have never become the Yiling Patriarch in the first damn place. He would have never found the Yin Iron. He probably would have died to the murder turtle alone. Long Wangji used Wei Wuxian's tricks to get away from Wen Chao in the woods when he was outnumbered. Hell, there's even a possibility he would have been killed at Tianyu Temple or in the Chang family manor by Zhu Yang without Wei Wuxian's help. Wei Wuxian and Long Wangji need each other. Okay, rant over. I just had to get that out of my system. The fight ends in Long Wangji's favor, only because Wei Wuxian cares more about his wine. That's when Wei Wuxian finds out that the Lan sect has over 3,000 rules for conduct. God, no wonder Long Wangji is always constantly on the verge of snapping. I mean, imagine following 3,500 rules for your entire life and being punished, sometimes brutally, for even breaking one of them. And some rando blithely flouts them, acts like it's no big deal, and sometimes even gets rewarded for it. I throw hands too, shit. After some banter, Long Wangji essentially drags Wei Wuxian by the ear to his uncle and his brother, sect leader Lan Zichen. Even though Lan Zichen is the sect leader, Lan Qiren has the most experience, so while he's technically Lan Zichen's advisor, he takes the lead and makes a lot of the hard decisions. One of those decisions will lead up to an absolutely heartbreaking scene later in the series. Uncle Lan and Big Brother Lan are currently in the middle of something right now, though, and really don't have time for Long Wangji's snitching. Neurodivergent headcanons notwithstanding, one of the things that keeps Long Wangji from making friends is the fact that he's a fucking narc. Lan Zichen is pretty adverse to making decisions and lets Lan Wangji choose Wei Wuxian's punishment, while Lan Qiren has the weirdest deja vu. This conversation does help Wei Wuxian realize that Long Wangji really isn't that much of an asshole, but Long Wangji would certainly prefer it if he thought he was. And maybe if he had said something, Wei Wuxian would have never noticed the guy from earlier covered by a white sheet. Honestly, it's none of his business, but they recognize Wei Wuxian's talent for sniffing out wicked sorcery. This is the first time we meet the Wen clan in their nightless city. I know this place is physically impossible, but who cares? The Legion of Doom wishes they could have this much aesthetic. We're introduced to Wen Qing, conflicted doctor and favored niece of sect leader Wen. She has one goal: make sure her side of the family, who are mostly apothecaries and doctors, stays safe and away from the rising conflict, especially her little brother. She's willing to put herself and other people on the line to do it, which should sound very familiar. This is the first time we hear about the Yin Iron, and we are taken back to the cloud recesses to find out exactly what it does. You see, the Yin Iron has this nasty habit of making corpse puppets. The translation I watched never confirmed that they were Jiangshi, so I'm not gonna say whether or not they are, but you can tell that this guy is a puppet by the cracks on his face and neck, and he's pretty much mindless. He can't eat, sleep, or do anything but what his master tells him to do. Man, it would sure suck if someone had a whole army of these guys. Outside, Long Wangji stares up at the moon, his favorite habit, and is interrupted by his brother. We find out that this incident is part of an ongoing investigation regarding disappearing cultivators. Lan Zichen's opinion is really the only one that matters to Long Wangji. That sounds familiar. Lan Zichen thinks Wei Wuxian is perfect for his brother to finally make a friend. After all, he has a very close friend from another sect that is quite different from him. Long Wangji is having precisely none of that, on account of his burning teenage angst, and I mean, can you blame him? Speaking of burning, this is where we meet Zhu Yang. He's the worst. I'm not taking constructive criticism at this time. Zhu Yang is the descendant of the original wielder of the Yin Iron and has a piece for himself. So when Rohan needs him, so he'll force choke him, but he won't kill him. You see, he's kind of a wild card because he doesn't care about the Wen sect's hostile takeover. He doesn't fear death, only boredom. He and Wen Rohan have an agreement, but beyond that, that's where their loyalty ends. Supposedly, there's a missing piece of Yin Iron, but Zhu Yang wants a way to kill the Chang clan of Yu Yang first. The next morning, after transcribing the Lan precepts all night, Wei Wuxian is nearly late to the morning salute. This is where we meet Nie Huai's song, fated meeting number 3, a fellow troublemaker, and Wei Wuxian's soon-to-be enabler. And forget liquor, because this man smuggled a whole-ass bird into cloud recesses. Now, in Western symbolism, canaries usually symbolize freedom or someone going unwittingly into their death, hence canary in a coal mine. So, I've seen a lot of people extrapolate some deeper meaning of this scene. While I respect that, the only thing that this scene means to me is that Nie Huaisang might appear frivolous, but he is frighteningly patient, especially when he wants something. He followed that bird for 3 days. Still, he's not exactly great with serious people, so he doesn't bother Long Wanji as much as Wei Wuxian does. As a matter of fact, even until the end of the show, he's actually really intimidated by him. Nie Huaisang brings his brother's emissary, Meng Yao. Now, this is fated meeting number 4, and it comes with the least amount of ceremony, because it doesn't involve Wei Wuxian. Meng Yao doesn't have a lot to his name. In fact, everyone pretty much knows that he's Jing Guangshang's illegitimate son born from one of his favorite prostitutes, which makes things especially awkward for moneybags over here. This is one of those examples where a mix of adaptation and censorship softens up the characters quite a bit. Like Zheng Cheng, this show's portrayal of Nie Mingjue is much softer. In fact, I wouldn't be surprised if this version sent Meng Yao with his brother because he thought meeting Lan Zichen would be good for him. And he's right, which puts a very depressing spin on things. Remember what I said in my last video about choices in character-driven narratives. However, it seems like there is a handful of guests that are late to the party. The Wen sect gets invited to Lan Gusu every year and never comes, so it's totally not suspicious that they suddenly change their minds after a sect member is mortally wounded. They interrupt the salute ceremony because Zheng Cheng can't have nice things and Wen Chao can't stop making people's lives difficult for a damn second. An important thing to remember about the cultivation world is that there's a lot of pageantry involved, meaning almost no one has a subtle bone in their body, least of all Wei Wuxian, meaning someone who can play it cool could really get one over on even the most adept cultivators. Either way, Lan Zichen manages to defuse the conflict with a blatant OSHA violation. Wen Chao's only discernible talent, besides holding his neck at a 45-degree angle, is knowing when he's outclassed. This is where we get more of a feeling of Wen Qing's situation with her brother Wen Yang. Essentially, the Wen sect sent their most non-threatening members to spy under the guise of being students. Wen Qing is already in a difficult position, here to do as she's told, so her brother, who like Yan Li has a weak constitution, is safe. Honestly, Wen Chao's big fat mouth is just making things difficult. Lan Qiren takes the high road, since it's pretty obvious that she's not here to start shit. This decision seems dumb at first, and I kind of agree, but I do get it. The Wen sect is already a problem at this point. It's best to keep your enemies closer. Outside, Wei Wuxian and Nie Huaisang become fast friends, and they try to drag Zheng Cheng along for the ride, forming what I like to call the Zero Brain Cell Brigade. Nie Huaisang particularly admires Wei Wuxian's brazen attitude with important people, particularly Long Wanji, who's less than receptive. While the students enjoy their break time, Lan Qiren and Lan Zichen talk a little more about the Wen clan. They already suspect that the corpse puppets are a part of the Wen sect's plans, but haven't told anyone, which again will come back to bite them in the ass. On his way back from their talk, Lan Zichen runs into Meng Yao, who again is totally not waiting for him. But it turns out he wants to say goodbye rather than stay, like Zichen, Huaisang, and Mingjue probably want him to. He feels out of place here, and I get it. Everyone likes to talk shit about him, and he's recently been promoted out of spite. Lan Zichen insists that Nie Mingjue totally promoted him because of his skills, and that they should speak to each other as peers, not as master and servant. Look at Meng Yao's face. No one has ever said this to him before. In a blink and you'll miss it moment, Meng Yao instinctively bows to a pair of passing students who don't even acknowledge him, despite what Lan Zichen just told him. Unfortunately, Meng Yao isn't the only one struggling with their duty, members of their sex, and what they really want. It's probably not unusual for Wenqing to be off on her own, especially considering that a lot of her incense requires herbs that she either plants or forages for herself. But she's not here to pick flowers. She's testing the supposedly secret barrier on the back mountain. Too bad for her, China's most perceptive playboys are goofing off in her general vicinity. Wei Wuxian tries his usual routine of chatting someone up to get a rise out of them, but Wenqing proves inflappable. Her bullshit filter is impenetrable, due to the amount she has to put up with, not just as a doctor, but as someone who has spent any amount of time around Wen Chao. Back at the Lan clan's guest accommodations, Zhang Cheng is pouting, saying Wei Wuxian's antics will reflect poorly on the Zhang sect, but he's really just pissy about being left behind. Zhang Yanli tries her best to assuage him, saying that Wei Wuxian embodies the motto of the Zhang clan perfectly. There's nothing to worry about. Zhang Cheng replies with well, that's why y'all like him more than me. Zhang Yanli tries to make him feel better by saying, oh, anyone who has integrity can get on Dad's good side.
Oh God, what does mental health look like?
Wei Wuxian strolls in past curfew with fire-roasted fish to boot. Zhang Cheng is too butthurt to really put up with him, even when he's being nice. Food is a constant theme in the Zhang family. For Zhang Yanli, food means love. As an elder sister and former pro-cook myself, I can empathize. Food is a universal language. I mean, even people who hate each other will meet in the break room for some free cake, hence the name of my previous channel. More importantly, it keeps people from fighting because their mouths are occupied. However, in terms of the Zhang family, it's not exactly the healthiest way to cope. Appeasing people too much leads to feelings never being discussed, problems never being solved, and behaviors never being corrected. She just wants her boys to get along, but at the same time, she never holds them accountable for their actions. After all, she's doing 4 times the emotional labor. When the Zhang family talks about their feelings, it usually comes out angry, so it's best just to keep everyone from being angry. This will eventually cause Zhang Yanli some major embarrassment down the line. Classes start and Wei Wuxian is up to his usual antics. I would like to say that I was like this in high school, but I was more like Nei Huaisong, who hung around more charismatic people. This gets him some undue attention, as it always does. And not just from Lang Wangji. Lan Jiren pulls the classic teacher move of, well, if you know so much, why don't you teach the class? And for the teachers in the audience, that's basically a tactic to embarrass the troublemaker into shutting up, but Wei Wuxian never shuts up. Lan Jiren gives him a little quiz to build him up and busts him back down with a, yeah, but you should have known that already, so here's an essay question. Then Wei Wuxian goes off book. Like, way off book. A cultivator's job is to take care of ghosts, evil spirits, and the general paranormal. These creatures are made from resentful, or dark, depending on what translation you're watching, energy. As a cultivator, it is your job to rid the world of resentful energy to keep this shit from happening. But Wei Wuxian brings up an interesting point. What if the ghost's last dying wish is to kill a bunch of people in revenge? Wouldn't that just make even more resentful energy? Lang Wangji has an answer for that, because he's an arc. If all else fails, destroy the ghost. Wei Wuxian doesn't like that, though. Why can't you just use resentful energy to fight resentful energy? Zhang Cheng wishes for death. Lan Qiren literally throws the book at him, and he keeps running his mouth. For now, this seems like the dumbass ramblings of a teenage boy who essentially wants to know why we can't beat one motherfucker with another motherfucker. But this, like everything else in this show, will come back to haunt them. Lan Qiren is not about to argue with this kid, so he kicks him out and sends Lang Wangji to go after him, because he will definitely wander off if unattended. Then, we come to what I like to call Fated Meeting 5.5, because technically they've already met. Wen Yang is a pretty decent archer, but isolation, and his job, keeps him from getting any decent practice in. Wei Wuxian is a pretty accomplished archer too, though you rarely see it in the show. Wen Yang's self-confidence is in hell. So he kind of pushes Wei Wuxian's effusive compliments away. He's not even old enough to attend classes, really. Wei Wuxian is desperate to brush off getting kicked out of class, so he decides to befriend this kid. despite the trouble his cousin caused just a couple days ago. Like any shy freshman who encounters a chill senior, Wenyoung goes from complete stranger to ride or die in record time. Especially after saving Wenqing from a stray arrow. She's not about to mess with someone who's already suspicious of her. This only makes Wei Wuxian more curious, of course, and he goes to the back hill to try and figure out exactly what she's looking for. But Long Wangji came to retrieve him, and decided to do so by force. This is the first time Wei Wuxian spends an extended amount of time with Long Wangji. He sees it as more of an opportunity than a punishment. When I first saw this show, I was really confused as to why he's so insistent on interacting with him. At first I thought it was just to get a rise out of him because you're at that age, it's usually your instinct to break or befriend the snitch. But watching this for the upteenth time, I think Wei Wuxian is still pretty impressed with Long Wangji and wants to impress him back. He wants to be equal to the man who is essentially the best cultivator of their age. This is probably the first person he's met who actually lives up to their reputation. Wei Wuxian is pretty flippant about a lot of things, but actual cultivation skill isn't one of them. This is the first time Wei Wuxian calls Long Wangji by his formal name, Lan Zhan. Lan Wangji responds to it, sealing his fate for the rest of his life. Wei Wuxian proceeds with his mission, annoy Lan Zhan until he acknowledges me. During the show, you'll notice that Wei Wuxian makes this Boy Scout gesture several times, usually when he makes a promise or swears he'll do something. He's lying every single time. Meanwhile, Wenqing is having a pretty bad day, all things considered. She has to complete her mission successfully. She might be valuable to Wen Rohan because of her medical skills, but Wenyoung is pretty sickly and otherwise useless to Wen Rohan. He will hurt him to get her to do what he wants. She's glad that he's out of the Nightless City and out of reach, but she doesn't want her brother getting too attached to these people, because if their plan goes well, a lot, if not all of them, are going to die. Back in the library, Wei Wuxian is still trying to make peace with Long Wangji, giving him a drawing he made of him. Long Wangji says it's boring, as usual, despite the fact that he very carefully places it aside rather than balling it up and throwing it away. What he didn't notice is Wei Wuxian switching the book he was reading out for a bodice ripper. That is absolutely the last straw for Long Wangji. He's so mad he can barely decide what to do. First, he nearly draws his sword in the middle of the library. Then he challenges him to a duel. Then when that doesn't work, he says, "Fine, fuck your book," and rips it to shreds. Lastly, he just tells him to fuck off and nearly draws his sword again before Wei Wuxian flounces off back to the Zero Brain Cell Brigade. As a middle child, I find Jang Chung both irritating and relatable, in a sense that he's stuck between his older brother and his weird friend, who apparently keeps enough porn on him at all times to not really be bothered when one gets ripped to shreds as long as his name wasn't mentioned. Man, Ne Huaisong is really good at flying under the radar, isn't he? There is an interesting moment between Wei Wuxian and Jang Chung here. Jang Chung basically said, "You've offended everyone since you got here. You're gonna die." Wei Wuxian just laughs him off and says, "Oh, that's not true. I have you to save me." Jang Chung just doesn't answer him. That's a big ol' oof right there. During this conversation, however, they spot one of the Wensec's dire owls, which is essentially a spy drone. They aren't the only ones who've noticed, however, and Lan Wangji snitches on Wei Wuxian, thinking he's the one messing with the ward on the back mountain. Look at Lan Zichen's face here. He knows exactly what's up. He also knows who's actually messing with the wards on the back mountain. This is when we meet Shu Se, or as I like to call him, Chekhov's asshole. This is another adaptation change. Like most of the antagonists in this story, he had a bigger, more morally complex role in the book. But here, he just reports on some water ghosts, drowning people, and he says he thinks he can handle it, and Lan Zichen thinks otherwise, clearly. The Zero Brain Cell Brigade has broken up for the day, and Jang Chung and Wei Wuxian run into Wenqing, who's still having a bad day. Spy or not, Wenqing is a doctor, and Zhang Yan Li has a weak constitution, like her brother. She tries not to let her empathy cloud her judgment. It's not working. Jung Chung is smitten with her because, I mean, who wouldn't be? She's amazing. And that's when she hears about the water demons. The twin snatched wastes of Gusu are already on their way out. That does not stop everyone from inviting themselves to go along. Jang Chung and Wei Wuxian are mostly bored since they have the week off, Wenqing wants to do more spy things, and Wen Young is just tired of being left behind. Lan Zichen is fully on the SS Wangxian at this point, so he's like, the more the merrier. He even makes Lan Wangji and Wei Wuxian share a room, which is absolutely meddling. In town, however, Lan Wangji and Wei Wuxian find out that people aren't just drowning, they're being eaten. They're both pretty sure that the creatures in the lake aren't just ghosts, but Lan Wangji refuses to agree with him, even when he absolutely does. On the night hunt, Wei Wuxian asks Lan Zichen if they think the water ghosts and the soul snatchings are connected. They are, but Lan Zichen can't talk about it right now, leaving Lan Wangji to struggle with the fact that his brother, the only friend he really has, is hiding something from him. During the battle with the water ghosts, Wei Wuxian continues to try and get Lan Wangji to acknowledge him. That's when we find out that Wei Wuxian's sword is named Su Bian, or whatever. Lan Wangji tries not to find that endearing. However, they aren't just dealing with water ghosts, and while Zheng Cheng engages in some heterosexual nonsense, Lan Wangji and Wei Wuxian nearly get capsized. They realize that they're dealing with a whole-ass demon. Remember when I said that empathy is dangerous in this show? Shu Sei sends his sword to fight the demon rather than use it to get away, leaving him stuck with it. Wen Young is about to follow everyone else when he sees the man struggling to get up. But when he goes to help and his little soul wandering problem pops up at the worst possible time, Wei Wuxian jumps in to help, but ends up needing Lan Wangji's help getting up. All in all successful, though hard-won night hunt. That night, Wei Wuxian visits Wen Young, who's still unconscious. He doesn't stay for long, and leaves him a talisman to protect him. Wenqing can't really tell him that she's touched by his compassion, because remember, if her mission goes well, he's going to die. The next morning is a bit more laid back, with Zheng Cheng engaging in further heterosexual nonsense when he crosses a saleswoman who persuades him to buy one of her combs. It's the perfect symbol for lovesickness, of course. And he's totally not smitten with anyone. At all. Ever. Why would you say that? Before they leave Keyi, however, Lan Wangji presses his brother for answers again, and begrudgingly admits that Wei Wuxian is right. All Lan Zichen has to say about that is, for all our sakes, you better hope he's not. Behind their backs, however, Wei Wuxian purchases 2 pots of Emperor's Smile liquor. That night, back at the Lan sect, Nie Huaisong joins Wei Wuxian and Zheng Cheng for some secret drinking. This shouldn't have brought back so many fond memories, but it really does. I've never been a drinker, but buying a whole bunch of snacks and junk food and having soul-searching deep conversation is like the quintessential college experience, but I'm getting off track. The Zero Brain Cell Brigade is in full swing and making way too much noise when Lan Wangji goes to see what's up, because he's an ARC. They try to play it cool, but there's not an ounce of chill to be had between any of these men. Nie Huaisong convinces Zheng Cheng to fake illness several times to get out of trouble. Wow, he seems pretty good at that. To give them a chance to escape, Wei Wuxian immobilizes Lan Wangji and goes a little too far, making him drink alcohol knowing he's an incredible lightweight. A note to anyone in college, do not do this. Especially not to your friends who don't drink. Don't trick them into drinking alcohol, don't put it in their drink when they're not looking, don't make them drink alcoholic drinks they can't seem to finish. It's none of your business why someone doesn't drink, and not only that, but when they're drunk, they're automatically your responsibility. Which is exactly what happens to Wei Wuxian. He finds out a couple of things about Lan Wangji in the process. 1. The headband is only meant for loved ones and spouses. 2. Lan Wangji would rather be alone than face the mortifying ordeal of being known. 3. Lan Wangji's mother is dead. This is when it occurs to Wei Wuxian that he's maybe gone too far and tries to commiserate with Lan Wangji instead, telling him the memory of his own parents, who, for all intents and purposes, were just like him, but they were rogue cultivators, isolated from the world. In hindsight, though he hardly remembers them, they clearly had an enormous effect on why Wuxian broke away from the cultivator world. He also died and left a child behind to be raised in the very world that reviled him. With a final toast, Wei Wuxian says, "May we never forget what is worth remembering, or remember what is best forgotten." No one forgets anything in this show. Everything is worth remembering. The next morning, before classes resume, Lan Qiren and Lan Zichen are discussing the recent demonic events. Apparently, the same thing is happening in Ye Huaisong's territory. The Lans take Wei Wuxian's conjecture to heart, but they still don't know what to do about it. One thing is for certain, the situation is getting worse, and one day they will be way past simply discussing it over morning tea. This is a little out of order, but we eventually come to understand that all the Lans seem to have emotional support extroverts. Speak of the devil, Wei Wuxian forgot the cardinal rule of getting someone drunk. When they are drunk, they are your responsibility. And he fucked up, big time. To his credit though, he tries to take responsibility, so everyone else can get out of punishment. However, he A. underestimates just how angry Lan Qiren is, and B. underestimates just how much Lan Wangji despises pity. Lan Qiren kind of loses it a little. In fact, he does something I notice a lot of parents in this show do. They're very careful to never lose face in front of the young generation, which is why it's so satisfying when it happens. Also, have y'all seen my son? He's adorable. Either way, the punishment is pretty brutal. Getting caned 300 times? That sucks. Jiang Yanli responds by telling Jiang Cheng that he should have been the responsible one and kept Wei Wuxian from drinking, because that makes sense. In an interesting bit of character development, Wei Wuxian almost runs away when he sees Lan Zichen a second time, but with the punishment he's endured, he's not going anywhere fast. Lan Zichen concedes that the punishment might have been a little much, and confirms that Wei Wuxian's mother, Changse Sanren, was in fact Lan Qiren's emotional support extrovert, or just a perpetual thorn in his side, sometimes they're the same thing. While Wei Wuxian goes off to get some physical therapy, Wenqing sends a message to her uncle, and she finds out before the boys that the yen iron is in the water. Speaking of the boys, Lan Zichen instructs Wei Wuxian to go to the cold pool on Back Mountain. You know, the one that's warded, to help with the pain, knowing good and damn well his brother is there doing the same thing. Brief sidebar, and I'll elaborate on this later, I realize how badly Lan Zichen wants his basket case of a little brother to make a friend, but good lord, man, give him a break. Wei Wuxian finally explains why he's so insistent on being Lan Wangji's friend. I'll say it before and I'll say it again. Wei Wuxian might be a flirt, but he respects skill and honesty, both of which Lan Wangji has in spades. During this conversation, however, something pulls Wei Wuxian and Lan Wangji underwater into a freezing cave beneath the lake. I love this moment right here because you can tell that Wei Wuxian is basically saying Lan Wangji's thoughts out loud. In the middle of the cave sits a very familiar Guqin. I'm sorry, I cannot pronounce that word correctly. Unfortunately, it will not let Wei Wuxian anywhere near it. This is the cord assassination technique, a very particular skill of the Wind sect. So, Lan Wangji knows that whoever this belonged to was super important. Also, there are a lot of rabbits, all wearing Lan sect headbands. Now, I tried to look into a deeper meaning for these little guys, but if I had to stretch my college dropout bullshit muscle, I'd say that the rabbits symbolize the moon, bright, still, and elegant, and at its fullest, but will never shine as brightly as the sun. Romances between the sun and the moon have existed for centuries across several different cultures, but one thing is for certain. The moon is the only person who looks directly at the sun, and the moon is the only thing the sun doesn't eventually burn. While it's clear the Guqin recognizes friend from foe, Wei Wuxian figures out how it does so. It recognizes the headbands and tells Lan Wangji to let him borrow it. And he listens! And from this moment onward, these two are irrevocably bound together. This is the moment their relationship takes root. They finally realize that they aren't just some passing acquaintances in summer school. They are friends, and could possibly be for several more years, if not their entire lives. You know it, I know it, great-grandma knows it. Wait, when did she get here? This is Lan Yi. She came to them after Lan Wangji played Inquiry, another signature technique of the Lan sect, which means Lan Wangji has proved his worth. Back outside, however, the boys have actually been gone for hours at this point. Lan Qiren and Lan Qichen are obviously worried, but a lot of people say Lan Qiren is more worried about the influence Wei Wuxian would have on Long Wanji while they're both gone. But I actually disagree. There are hella demons in the gentry right now. He doesn't want them to get hurt. Lan Qiren might be a little bit of a hard ass, but he's shown concern for Long Wanji's safety at the very least. Also, just a brief note here, I love how Lan Qichen is like, we have some people looking for them. The entire sect is looking for them. Even though she's not feeling well, poor, long-suffering Lan Yi has joined the search. She really hates it when Wei Wuxian disappears without saying anything. Man, I hope that doesn't become a habit. However, she still has the presence of mind to engage in some heterosexual nonsense. Back in the cave, Wei Wuxian and Long Wanji are in awe of Lan Yi. She was the first and only female leader of the Lan sect and best friend of Boshan Sanren, Wei Wuxian's grandmaster by way of his mother. She confirms that the reason she's still around is that she's been binding the yin iron. Our MacGuffin, everybody. A long time ago, the yin iron belonged to Zhui Shanghai, Zhui Yang's ancestor. Zhui Shanghai was a powerful grandmaster that lived in Yiling. He was not a good person. He used the yin iron to sacrifice living people, using a monster called the Tortoise of Slaughter. When he was finally executed, all the people he killed were buried in Yiling, creating the burial mounds. A place so thick with resentful energy that no one wants to go near it. I talked about this briefly in my Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon analysis, is that in Wuxia and Jianjia, because a lot of these stories have to deal with community and being part of a whole, the biggest crime you can commit is selfishness. Not murder or thievery. Doing bad things to benefit the whole is par for the course. But acting in your own self-interest is the true sin. The thing is, the yin iron wasn't always evil. When Wen Mao came to kill Zhang Hai, no one really knows what happened between them. They tried to suppress the yin iron and broke it into 4 pieces. Though there were 5 clans, so there are actually 4 pieces, but no one knows that yet. Being a female sect leader, Lan Yi faced a lot of opposition over anything she did. She and Bosan Sanren were, close friends, you know, like Sappho and her friend who lived on the Isle of Lesbos, but that's not the point. Lan Yi then deserves a heaping helping of foreshadowing. She wanted to use the yin iron to accomplish her goals. She wasn't able to control it. Her efforts to do so cost her her family, and she fell out with her closest friend, and she died. I want to drive this home. The only difference between her and Wei Wuxian is that he didn't have any self-righteousness and truly had no choice to do what he did. The minute he became self-righteous, he lost everything. The thing about morals in the book, more so than the show, is that murder, in the most extreme circumstances, can be justified. But selfishness is unforgivable, and you will pay for it. She goes on to tell them that the yin iron is becoming more powerful because someone is gathering all the pieces. Considering that the corpse puppets are popping up and cultivators are getting their souls stolen, Wei Wuxian and Long Wanji are able to determine that whoever has these iron shards is experimenting, and they need to find the last 2 shards before when Rohan is able to gather them all and destroy life as they know it. Lan Yi pulls a great decretry and tells the boys that her time is up. Moved by her story and a sense of filial piety, Lan Wanji readily accepts his quest, and so does Wei Wuxian. He explains that helping Lan Yi is a part of his duty as basically Boshan Sanren's grandson. As she vanishes, she pleads with them not to make the same mistakes she did. She disappears, knowing that these kids are in fact going to make the exact same mistakes. Outside with the search party, Wen Yang and Wen Qing both sense something is off. Mostly because they know what to look for. Zheng Cheng keeps trying to have a conversation with her, but the universe won't let them have nice things, and they get interrupted by Wei Wuxian and Long Wanji unceremoniously tumbling out of the mountain itself. I expected Zheng Cheng to be more surprised, but honestly, they encounter the supernatural on a daily basis, so this is like a Tuesday for them. It turns out they've been gone for more than 24 hours. Their position is compromising, and Long Wanji is freaking out, not just about the potential embarrassment, but that loudmouth Wei Wuxian is going to tell the future leader of the Jiang sect the secret the Lan sect has been keeping for nearly a century. It's his job as Myrmidon of the Jiang sect to report those kinds of things. For a moment, Long Wanji even resigns himself to confessing, but Long Wanji covers for him and acts like it's no big deal. For a man who's lived by thousands of rules his entire life, having someone lie for him with no ulterior motive is life-changing. After being treated for the hypothermia they definitely have, Lan Zichen helps seal the yin iron for the time being. Turns out they've always known about the shard, and that's why sending the Wen sect away would have only made them more suspicious, but it seems now it's unavoidable. Wei Wuxian suggests using the yin iron to find the others. He's been right about literally everything thus far, and Lan Wangji is starting to have some real confidence in him, so he agrees. Lan Jiren doesn't listen, because of course, and swears Wei Wuxian to secrecy. Nei Huaisong is actually pretty worried about Wei Wuxian. Despite his perceived frivolity, he's actually a very devoted friend. And this scene goes on to show that Wei Wuxian will keep his promise, not for Lan Qiren, but for Long Wanji. And no matter how close Nei Huaisong is to Wei Wuxian, he'll always be a little bit afraid of Hong Wanjun. But this promise causes a problem. Zhang Cheng already knows his brother is hiding something from him, because Wei Wuxian has never hidden anything from him before. After being his dad and sister's second choice, he's afraid that's going to happen with Wei Wuxian too. Several feet away, Long Wanji believes the exact same thing. Of course, their newfound friendship pales in comparison to the bond between brothers. That thought compels him to go back and speak with his own brother. Of course, when Rohan is instantly aware of everything that just happened, he decides to finally send Zhu Yang to Yu Yang, where he can find the Chang sect and do whatever he wants, murder, as long as he returns the yin iron to him. When Chao has other ideas though, he doesn't want to be second best either. Blissfully unaware of everything that's going on in the Nightless City, the guest disciples make lanterns. This is the first time Long Wanji and Wei Wuxian really hang out together. It's no secret Long Wanji actually really likes Wei Wuxian's artwork, and he makes Long Wanji smile for the first time he's seen him. My crops are watered and my skin is clear. As they release the lanterns, everyone makes a wish. Wei Wuxian declares that he will always fight on the side of justice. Long Wanji falls hard and fast with no chance of recovery. This scene is important for a number of reasons, and I'll harp on it in a later episode when I talk specifically about the Wangxian dynamic. But I want to bring up this moment in particular because it reminds me of a line from Beauty and the Beast of all things. And that's the line, bittersweet and strange, finding you can change, learning you were wrong. And man, if this look doesn't say, wow, I was wrong about you all along and I am not upset about that. Wei Wuxian asks Zheng Yongli what her wish was, and the Jin sect members who think everything is their business join the conversation, telling her to wish for a happy marriage. Embarrassed, Moneybags leaves the conversation. Dude, I promise you, no matter how embarrassed you are only embarrassing her more. Mian Mian tries to tell him that, but he only ends up snapping at her, saying he wants nothing to do with Zheng Yongli, implied that he thinks she's beneath him. Wei Wuxian doesn't like that one bit. And the one thing about the Jin sect is they never back down from a fight when provoked. So a fight naturally ensues. I don't know if y'all have ever been in a fight, but when someone holds you back by your arms and you're just kicking at them, you think you look so badass, but it just looks goofy as hell, and you're making life difficult for everyone around you. Long Wanji isn't the one to talk Wei Wuxian down. That honor still belongs to Zheng Yongli. Everyone in the crowd concedes that Jin Jisuan deserved it, but Zheng Yongli has heard what she fears the most, that her future husband looks down on her, just like Jin Guangshan does to his wife, who he flagrantly cheats on, and she does not want that life. And that breaks her heart, because she actually really loves Jin Jisuan. The next morning, Long Wanji comes in to check on Wei Wuxian, only to find him goofing off and not taking his punishment seriously at all. But then, Dad comes. Turns out this fight had a lot more consequences than initially thought. See what I mean about choices? Even though it was made in the heat of the moment, this, by all means routine scuffle, results in Zheng Yongli's engagement being dissolved. As Canary from Tumblr pointed out, links below, Jing Guangshan is actually being the more reasonable parent here. Feudal marriages aren't made for companionship, but for military reasons. Zhang Yanli would essentially be set for life. But her father doesn't think much of her mother's plans, which is understandable because his marriage, arranged similarly, is dreadfully unhappy. But in this case, he's out of line. Sect leader Jin tries to persuade him, but he ends the engagement, putting the future ties of the 5 major sects, his relationship with Jing Guangshang, and his daughter's future all at risk because of a fight between 2 teenage boys. However, the fact remains that the gentry has bigger fish to fry than Yanli's marriage. Wei Wuxian is still essentially a 17-year-old kid here, so it doesn't surprise me that he apologizes to his sister by being cute rather than actually apologizing. She ends up comforting him, and it's amazing that her back doesn't break from all that emotional labor. What sets Zhang Fengyan apart from the rest of the sect leaders is that he seems to get along with everyone. Notice how they didn't ask Jing Guangshan to sit with them. Zhang Fengyan is everyone's ally. He's the glue that keeps the 5 major sects together. The kids come in to say goodbye, and Wei Wuxian is particularly upset about leaving, even though Lan Qiren straight up calls him a bad influence to his father's face. But it turns out, the Zhang sect aren't the only ones leaving. Lang Wangji is also leaving, and doesn't say goodbye to Wei Wuxian. This becomes one of many unsatisfying farewells for them. But it doesn't last for long. I won't lie, the Untamed takes ages to set up the actual plot. I get it, I understand why, but it is a slow start. Especially when episode 3 could have opened up with the mission for alcohol, the resulting sword fight, but I digress. We're not really here for criticism, are we? Not all analysis is critique. The Gusulan lecture arc, while plotting, provides some great aspects of the cultivation world because the cultivation subculture is always a little bit different in every Xianzhan novel. However, Cloud Recesses is only one place. How can one location lead to extensive world building? This goes back to our previous episode of Show, Don't Tell. It's important to remember that characters are products of their surroundings, whether they're conforming or rebelling against it. So, world building is exemplified by the people who live in it. Let's start with the Zhang sect, since the show focuses on them the most. The Zhang sect doesn't seem to have a specialty unlike the Jin, Lan, and Ye sects. They don't really have any significant military might, they descended from rangers, so the Zhang sect is pretty homespun compared to the other 4 major sects, especially since they seem to be the only ones who can swim, hunt, catch fish, and build fires. It's stated several times that there are several lakes and rivers where the Zhang sect is, so they live around wetlands, which personally reminds me a lot of home. Bluntly speaking, they're swamp people. Despite this, however, it is quite obvious that Zhang Fengyan is everyone's friend. We'll talk about this more when I speculate on the downfall of the Zhang sect, but for now, let's just leave it at the Zhang sect being everyone's mediator. However, despite this, Zhang Fengyan does seem to neglect a great deal of internal conflict. The more I think about it, the more I realize that the dynamic between the siblings aren't as healthy as they seem. Zhang Yanli clearly loves both of her brothers, and I'm not saying she loves Wei Wuxian more. In fact, I believe she loves them both equally. However, Zhang Fengyan is quite mean, and at his age, a whiny stick in the mud, frankly. I mean, we've never seen that before. But not only that, he takes after someone who clearly frightens her. Love, unfortunately, is not equal to liking someone. As a feudal daughter, a lot of things are decided for her, so it doesn't surprise me at all that she gets along better with the resident free spirit. That's precisely the problem, though. Right now, Wei Wuxian really has no concept of just how much damage he causes, or he does and just doesn't care. I'm more leaning towards the latter. He's baby, and he's also incredibly self-centered because of that, despite how kind he can be. Zhang Yanli babies Wei Wuxian constantly. She definitely lets him get away with murder, even literally later on. She's one of those food is love people, and I get it. Trust me, I get it, being an eldest daughter myself. But keep in mind, every time you see the Zhang sect eating, there's love there, even in this scene. That's not always the best thing, though. As stated before, appeasement isn't accountability. Appeasement means they'll keep doing it again and again, until it clicks that they're in trouble. Even then, Zhang Fengyan will blame Zhang Cheng. Honestly, how old is Zhang Cheng right now? 15? 16? Maybe younger? His sister is about 20 and Wei Wuxian is somewhere in between. Imagine being in charge of anything at that age, much less the way your family is perceived and taken seriously in the LAN sect when your brother has no self-control and the only other sane person in your family has no intention of stopping him. I can't tell if I feel bad for him or if he's just bringing it on himself by trying to cage the bird. Usually the tighter the grip, the more things are apt to spiral out of control, but a kid his age wouldn't realize that. This is in direct opposition to the Jin sect. The sect Zhangyan Li will eventually join. Just by the pageantry alone, it's pretty easy to see the Jin sect has all the rich kids. Zhen Jiswan empties out an entire inn just so he doesn't associate with the commoners. He has enough free time to be able to tell how long the tea's been sitting out just by smell. What I'm trying to say is everything about this supposedly puritanical sect is hella fancy. I mean, they even gave the infamous minimalist LAN sect grandmaster a book bound in gold as a gift. Zheng Cheng could not be more done. Just by the nature of their existence, the Jin and Zhang sects are immediately at odds with each other. Of course, Moneybags would look down on someone like Zhangyan Li despite how sweet, wonderful, and selfless she is. Listen, I know feudal marriages aren't made for love, but Zhangyan Li does like him, but my question is why? Okay, well listen, my personal tastes aside, this is the age-old trope of the star-crossed lovers. While they do cross the finish line, so to speak, we all know how this is going to end. The first episode told us so. The LAN sect is the actually puritanical sect with minimalist accommodations, modest food, and a metric fuck-ton of rules. This sect is the moral pillar of the cultivation world, which puts Long Wanji's character arc into terrifying perspective. Long Wanji and Lan Chen are the twin Jades of Gusu. Jade isn't just a sign of wealth, but purity, balance, and protection. They are pretty much untouchable. Their uncle Lan Ren would rather it stay that way because last time a LAN sect member got funny ideas, he ditched his job, his entire family, and left him with 2 kids to raise, one of which already outranked him. Those who don't learn their history are doomed to repeat it, I guess, but you can't avoid the mistakes of the past by avoiding the issue entirely. Lan Ren's dogmatic attitude runs in direct correlation to Wei Wuxian's devil-may-care. He cares about the order, and probably sees a lot of potential in Zhang Cheng. I can just imagine him receiving a letter from Zhang Fengyan like, "Oh, Zhang Cheng would love to go to the LAN lecture, and Wei Wuxian can come too," and Lan Ren being like, "Dude, no, please." That being said, his nephews have all their individual issues. Lan Chen is a leader of the LAN sect. He's gentle, kind, level-headed, even when he shouldn't be. However, Lan Chen is definitely an acts of service is my love language kind of guy, just like Zhangyan Li, which isn't inherently bad per se, but he is the model of morality in a stringent society. Obedience is all he's ever known, and it's how he shows his love. This will come back during the Sunshot campaign. Simply put, this man has never made a decision in his life. And when it comes down to choosing between 2 friends and eventually choosing between his best friend and his brother, it doesn't end well. Then we have Long Wanji, the not-so-gentle one, and no wonder. He might have his brother's grace, but his position involves more night hunts, considering his title Hongguan Jun. He doesn't have to be nice, it's literally not his job to be. If Zhang Cheng and Long Wanji ever bothered to have an actual conversation, they probably would have bonded over people openly talking about how much more they prefer their older brothers to them. That compared with intimidating everyone just by existing, not being able to relate to the people around, and having to obey 3,500 rules every day, no wonder he's constantly on edge. No wonder Wei Wuxian, who at this point is about as intimidating as a friendly puppy, friends with everyone around him, completely unfettered by the rules, and yet still somehow equal in skill and intellect, pushed him over that same edge. And that's why Lan Chen wanted them to become friends, because he too has an emotional support extrovert. And let's be honest here, Lan Chen's opinion is the only one Long Wanji really gives a damn about at this point. Speaking of extroverts, Wen Chao is that drunk guy at a party who sulks around trying to talk to girls and then cries when he gets kicked out. The Wen sect is one of the biggest red herrings in the show. You and everyone else thinks that the Wen sect is the biggest problem in the cultivation world. And yes, they need to be dealt with, but they're no more guilty of what any other sects have done or will do, which is the point, I know. But the important part is understanding the position Wenqing is in and why Jing Cheng is so taken with her initially. Wenqing, at her core, is a kind person, so naturally she's conflicted over the mission she has to accomplish. As the favored niece of the Wen sect, she also has to find the Yin Iron Shard and bring it back to her uncle. Her uncle is going to kill everyone there if they resist his coming rise to power, so she can't get attached to anyone. She can't let Wen Yang get attached to them either. He's already frail enough. Who knows what'll happen to his wandering soul if he finds out his family killed all his new friends. She's very much like Zheng Cheng in this instance. She will make the hard decisions to protect her family. Zheng Cheng greatly admires her grace under pressure because frankly, he doesn't have any. However, unlike Zheng Cheng, we can tell pretty early on that Wenqing will pick her ideals over her loyalty to the order. This will be important later and come back in the most devastating way possible. To round out the 5 major clans, we have the Nie sect, presenting Meng Yao and Ne Huaisang, 2 of the most important characters in the show with the least amount of fanfare. Oh my god, they underplay these 2 so much and it comes out so well. Right now, Meng Yao is about a hair's breadth better than his servant. While he's valued, he lives in a very consistently hostile environment. But so does Nie Huaisang, frankly. He's the one who has to deal with his brother's outbursts, not Meng Yao. However, unlike other clans in this list, we don't really get a feel for the Nie sect. In fact, we're told repeatedly that they don't exemplify it. Now, this serves a couple of purposes. One, to make the reveal of Nie Mingshui that much more significant, but for right now, Nie Huaisang and Meng Yao are there to make others look better by comparison. Meng Yao is there to establish Lan Zichen's kindness. Nie Huaisang is there to offset Zheng Cheng's inferiority complex and show that Wei Wuxian will make friends with anyone as long as they're cool. This is one of the reasons I love character-driven narratives, because Lan Zichen and Wei Wuxian truly have no concept of just how much their decision to befriend these men will impact their lives. So we've established, without leaving the Lan sect, each of the 5 major sects' major traits, and conflicts that whittle down to rich but salacious, country but complicated, evil but conflicted, rigid but yearning, and very dependent on one person. So how do these conflicts affect the characters' relationships outside of their families? Let's start with the least obvious choice. Zhen Cheng and Wenqing. These 2 are essentially 2 sides of the same coin. They're constantly stuck between their love for their brother and their dedication to the order. Zheng Cheng respects someone who adheres to their duties, because he's constantly having to rein Wei Wuxian in, just like she has to do with Wen Yang. They can relate to each other, but they'll never get a chance to. Zheng Cheng is more in love with the idea of Wenqing than her herself. He's kind of lonely. Someone as stern and as pretty as Wenqing could understand him. Wenqing, however, is more in love with the idea of freedom. Maybe if they had gotten together, he would have stood up for her in the end, which is somehow worse. Speaking of people who can't relate to each other, Zhang Anli and Jin Jishuan. Get a load of this heterosexual nonsense. Now, I covered the socioeconomic, more socio than economic, let's be real, implications of their relationship, but honestly I think it boils down to who's the earnest one. Jin Jishuan is surrounded by the fakest bullshitters out there, like a whole ass pit of vipers. While he's not my favorite, when it comes to his family, he's kind of the exception to the rule. His actions all make sense and are consistent. That's good writing. I might be giving Zhang Fengmian too much credit here, because nice is different than good. I sometimes wonder if he was just looking for an excuse to break off his daughter's engagement. He's one of Jing Guanshan's closest friends, and it's not like his lecherous behavior is a secret. He's literally a danger to all the women around him, like it really be your own crew. He probably didn't want her to be exposed to that, without knowing if the apple fell too far from the groping tree. But like I said, that's purely conjecture. Speaking of massive wealth gaps, we have Meng Yao and Lan Zichen. There's not much here because they interact for like 5 seconds, but I still think that Nie Mingjue sent him with Nie Huaisong to meet Lan Zichen and expected him to stay for several days. This guy bows his head on instinct, and this is the first time anyone has bothered to stop him. Ever develop a crush on someone just because they showed you basic human decency? Because yeah, look at Meng Yao's face. He's not coming back from this. These two relationships don't tell us much about the Nie clan, but it does tell us that Meng Yao and Nie Huaisong feel inferior compared to the people around them. And like, no wonder, because damn. Speaking of unconditional loyalty, Wen Yang and Wei Wuxian. Honestly, there's not much to say here just yet because their relationship is a lot like Lan Zichen and Meng Yao's. Some people criticize how quickly Wen Yang goes from complete stranger to ride or die, but say nothing about how quickly Meng Yao fell for Lan Zichen. But you cannot tell me that a freshman in high school, especially a shy and antisocial one, wouldn't go full Dominic Toretto for the one nice senior in your class that talked to you once? No? Just me? Okay. But seriously, Wen Yang is kind of the reason I think Meng Yao is full of shit towards the end of the show, but I'm saving that for another video. It's just know that he's full of shit! Speaking of inferiority complexes, the Zero Brain Cell Brigade. Zhang Cheng, Nie Huaisong, and Wei Wuxian are my favorite group dynamic. The wild card enabler, and the one who's not as above it all as they think. But if you think about it, like really think about it, this is really the last time Nie Huaisong is truly happy. Just saying, don't think about it too hard. They don't get much screen time together, and it's no wonder fans of the show constantly speculate about Nie Huaisong and Zhang Cheng's relationship. Because when you really think about it, Nie Huaisong is Zhang Cheng's only friend, and they maintained their relationship for almost 20 years. And I don't think I need to elaborate on what Nie Huaisong did for Wei Wuxian in the end, even if it was technically against his will. Have you ever heard the saying, "I know who you are by the company you keep"? Well, it's true, but you can tell what a place is like by the people that come out of it. That's why the LAN lecture arc is good for establishing not only characters, but the environment in which they come from. It can be subtle, like the Nie sect where Nie Huaisong and Meng Yao feel inferior compared to the people around them. One envies his friend, and the other is pretty much a servant bound by rampant capitalism. When you finally see the unclean realm, you're like, oh, that's why they're like that. It can be a little more obvious, like the Jin sect with their entourages, eloquent emissaries, and gold thread-bound notebooks. It almost reminds me of Bleach, when you get a feeling for each squad judging by the people who lead it. I mean, let's be real, Kenpachi clearly isn't a leader of the healers. When you're world building or developing a specific culture for your story, the most important thing to remember when you write your story is how will the world change? How will these characters impact the world around them? Is the story intensely personal, or will they take everyone down with them? When Wei Wuxian follows Long Wanji to Yuyang, they have no idea that their lives will change drastically upon their return. Thank you for watching part 2 of the Untamed analysis series. This one was a doozy, and will likely be one of the longest ones because world building is such a massive task. Next is the Yin Adventure arc, aka the Shonen Anime arc, and if I recall correctly, not entirely canon. It's going to explore the dynamic of the 5-man band, so it won't be as long and be a little more streamlined. It's gonna be great though, and it's gonna be so much fun because it's one of my personal favorites. Right now, it's scheduled for way down the line, but I'll let you know if I have more time. The lollipops are on your way out, and I will see you in the next video. Stay weird, lovelies, and happy eating!